Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to Gun Lab today. We have a cool project lined up. What we're going to go ahead and do is rebarrel a Mauser. We're starting with a rifle like this. This is a Yugoslav M48A Mauser. It's in pretty nice condition overall, but the bore is trashed. It's totally shot out. So what we're going to do is strip the rifle down. We're going to take the barrel off, and we're going to go ahead and replace it with a really nice new 308 stainless steel barrel. So follow along and let's get started. We'll go through the whole process with you. So the first step, of course, is to take the barreled action out of the stock. We've done that. And about half an hour ago I sprayed some just spray lubricant, some WD-40, onto the intersection of the receiver and the barrel and just let that sit standing up. And now I think we're ready to give it a try. What I'm going to do is use these two aluminum blocks along with some abrasive grit, or abrasive mesh. This is the sort of thing that you use when you're soldering, for example, to clean up copper pipe. And I just took one strip, ripped it in half, and I'm going to put one piece in each of these blocks, and then drop this over my barrel. That gives me a nice square surface to hold on to the round barrel. Alright, as you can see, we have the barrel set here in our hydraulic press. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that down. It's important to note that we are clamping on the barrel, not on the action. These things can be a real pain to get off, so I'm going to put a lot of pressure on that. Now, we have a two-part action wrench here. This U-shaped piece slips over the ring of the rifle, and then our crossbar goes through like that. Then, I'm going to hit it with a hammer. Generally, a good whack on the hammer will break this loose. Just like that. Alright, I hope you'll excuse the crashing noise as the receiver wrench fell off, but that impact broke it free, and now we can just unthread it the rest of the way. And that is how you take the receiver and the barrel apart on an old rifle. Alright, now that we have our Mauser completely disassembled and we have just a stripped bare receiver to work with, we need to trim up the front of the receiver to make sure everything is nice and square and flush. Basically, when we torque the barrel in, we want to make sure that all the surfaces are mating on even, parallel, flat surfaces, so that when we torque the barrel down to its final position, we're not pushing it off in any direction. So there are two specific surfaces of the receiver that we need to look at. We need to look at the very front shoulder here, and then we need to look at the inner shoulder back in here, because those are the two surfaces that the barrel is going to mate with. So we have a couple of tools that we've put together specifically to do this. Our first tool is this. It's a profiled rod, and it threads into the receiver. We have the threading on here set so that it matches the barrel thread. So we can run this all the way in until it stops. There we go. Now, this can be turned on centers in our lathe, and that will allow us to turn the receiver nice and concentric without having to deal with lining it up in a 4-jaw chuck. So we're going to mount this in the lathe, and then we're going to turn down just the very front face here until it's nice and flat. Alright, you can see we have the tool mounted on the centers and faceplate of our lathe. We have a dog on there to make sure that it turns appropriately. When we come in and take a closer look at the face of the receiver, we're going to be turning down this surface. We have our tool set up here, and we're going to do this in a couple of short passes to make sure that we take nice thin cuts and only take off what we need to. Alright, so the next surface we need to deal with is this inside surface where the face of the barrel is going to line up onto the receiver. So what we're going to do for that is use another tool we put together here. This is a two-part tool. This is threaded to run into the barrel threads, and then we have a removable brass plate there on a shank. So we're going to put a little bit of lapping compound on the face here. We're then going to thread this into the barrel, and then that allows us to spin that brass disc and the lapping compound on the inside face. As you could see, I've got some blue in there, some marking blue, and we're going to go ahead and polish it down until that's all nice and evenly disappeared. Alright, there's a little bit of our lapping compound. It doesn't take much. Go ahead. Put that in. Not putting all that much pressure on this, just enough to push it into contact with the back of the receiver in there. A little bit more, and then we'll pull it out and take a look. Alright, we still have a little bit more to take out. And again, we're not really trying to remove material. We just want to take out any high spots so that that inside face is nice and smooth and flat. That's going to ensure that when we torque the barrel down, we're not twisting it off in one direction. Alright guys, we now have a nice polished inner surface there. We move on to our next step. Alright guys, so we've got our receiver all prepped up, and we're ready for the next step, which is going to be cutting the barrel. We have gotten our hands on this AR-10 barrel. It was chambered incorrectly, and so it's kind of useless as an AR-10 barrel. So what we're going to go ahead and do is cut the threads off the end here. We're going to re-thread it up on this shoulder to fit our Mauser receiver, and then we're going to rechamber it. So absolutely the most important thing involved in properly chambering and threading a barrel is getting it exactly concentric. We want to make sure that the threads that we're cutting are exactly parallel to the bore of the barrel, and we want to make sure that the chamber we're cutting is exactly parallel to the bore of the barrel. Now on pretty much any barrel, there is going to be a little bit of bend. The bore is not going to be drilled perfectly straight, so we can't just line it up based on the ends of the barrel, because we know that barrel's doing this in the middle. So what we've done instead is we've set it up in a 4-jaw chuck. And we'll take a closer look. So this 4-jaw chuck allows me to perfectly center the barrel here, and then on the back side of the lathe we have a spider, and I made a little plug that sits over the end of the barrel because the barrel's not quite long enough to reach this end by itself. And those brass screws allow me to hold the back end of the barrel right where I need it. So at this end, what I've done is set my dial indicator just inside the chamber. And as you can see, I have just a couple tenths of movement. Now that's a good start, but what I need to make sure is that when I move the indicator into the barrel farther, like so, let's move this as far in as I can get it, and then we'll bring it back down. Now we want this to also be perfectly concentric. And you can see I've got right about the same amount of play there. And what that tells me is that this chamber end of the barrel is lined up. Back here, it may be going up or down or somewhere else, but the most important thing is to have the chamber where I'm cutting the chamber and the threads to be perfectly concentric, which it is. So I can go ahead with the next step now, which is going to be cutting off the existing threads and then cutting a thread relief groove up here so that I can cut my own new threads. All right, it's important to lock down the carriage when I'm doing this. Now this barrel is made of stainless steel, so in order to cut properly I need to make sure that my cutoff tool, which in this case is just high-speed steel, I need to make sure this is very nice and sharp, and I need to have it perfectly level so that it doesn't try to climb over or dig into the part. And we'll turn on the coolant and get going at the slowest spindle speed that I can manage. There we go. Alright, so the next thing I need to do is cut the threads to fit my receiver. I can take a depth micrometer here and measure down to see exactly how deep my threads need to go. Threads and relief groove. And on this particular receiver, that is 0.618 inches. So I need that much space combined between my threads and my relief groove. So we'll go ahead and move my parting tool over to the correct spot and go ahead and cut that relief groove so I can cut the threads. There we go. There we go, perfect. Now, before we move on, I do want to point something out here. I indicated my barrel concentric to the inside of the bore, which is what matters. What doesn't matter is the outside of the bore, because it will probably always be a little bit different. The outside of the barrel won't be perfectly concentric to the inside. As you can see, we have almost 2/1000ths run out here, just on the outside, where we're pretty much perfect. We're within a few tenths on the inside. Now the reason that I'm pointing this out is because when I cut the threads, I want them to be concentric to the inside, so that when I thread the barrel in, I'm threading the bore directly into the center of the receiver. Alright, we're assuming you know how to cut threads here, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is thread this section. I'm using a carbide threading tool. It's nice and sharp, it'll do a real nice job on this stainless steel. And I have a 1 in 12 pitch, so I've got that set up on the lathe, and we're ready to go. Alright, so we're done with our threading. Alright, this is now threaded all the way until it stops on the barrel. This black line here that you can see, maybe you can see. Alright. This black line indicates the top of the barrel, so I need to rotate this, thread the receiver on an additional 1 1/4 revolutions. So first I have to trim up the end of the threads so that it will come forward that much. Then I will also need to trim this shoulder right here back to allow it, because we want, let me take this off. We need this surface and this surface to lock up at the exact same time against the two matching areas on the receiver. So we're going to start by cutting back our thread face here, and then we'll cut this back to match. Alright, let's test fit our receiver again. I cut about 65 thousandths off, so this should go just about up to the shoulder on the barrel. Okay, we're close. I'm going to go ahead and use a set of feeler gauges to see exactly how much we have left. Looks like we have about 28 thousandths left there. And as you can see, we've done about a half a rotation. So our receiver is now a quarter turn past the top of the receiver, so we have about 3/4 of a turn left to go. We can do a little bit of math there. We have a 1 in 12 pitch, which means that one full revolution is 83 thousandths of an inch. I need 3/4 of that, which tells me I have about 63 thousandths still to go to take off of the inside threads, and then this amount, 63, minus the space I have here to take off this shoulder. Alright guys, our threading is all done. When I tighten this up just to a hand snug, you can see I'm very close to having my top dead center mark meet the very top of my receiver. This is going to require, just a slight turn more. That's probably between 1 and 2 thousandths of travel forward for the receiver on the threads. And we'll do that with a big wrench to torque the barrel down once everything else is done. There are a couple things that we need to pay attention to when we're chambering. Alright, so this is my reamer holder, and you can see there's a gap in there, and this reamer will move. I don't know if you can quite see that, but this reamer has some play in the holder. That's very important, because what we want the reamer to do is center itself in the bore as it travels. That will ensure that it cuts nice and straight and to size. As a matter of fact, the reason that we have these AR-10 barrels in the first place is because when they were originally chambered, the guy running the machine used a rigid holder for the reamer, and as a result the back end of the chambers was it was egged out. It was too large, and cartridges kind of wobbled around in there. I have this set up in my reamer holder. I have a 4-flute roughing reamer. This is 308 caliber. It's a 308 barrel, of course, and we're going to go ahead and run this in. It's a very slow process. We don't want to rush this. We don't want to break the reamer. We don't want to dull the reamer. So I'm going to go ahead and use my same very low speed setting. We will be running coolant on the reamer, and let's get started. rinsing this reamer really slowly, and we're backing it out a lot to clear chips, because I don't want the chip to get stuck under one of the cutting edges and start to score the inside of the chamber or start to make the whole thing chatter. Now I will be following this with a finishing reamer, but I still want to be real careful with the roughing reamer. Alright, we're just about done with the roughing reamer here. I have one or two more passes through. What I did was use a live cartridge, just lined up on top of the reamer and made a little felt tip pen mark on the body of the reamer itself so that I know roughly how deep to go. I don't have to be very precise because, like I said, this is just the roughing reamer. Alright, we're going to call that good. Bring it out of here. And now I need to change out to a finish reamer. Alright, so I've got my finishing reamer in there. This is a 6 flute where the roughing was a 4 flute. And you can see right here, I've made myself a similar mark, just with a felt tip marker. And that I'm not using that for any sort of final measurement. That's just the point where I'm going in before I start measuring. So once I get there, then we'll start being real careful and measuring back and forth between passes. So for now, same process as the roughing reamer. We're just going to take it real nice and slow and easy, run coolant, and pull it out to flush the chips very, very often. Takes very little pressure on the tailstock dial to give this some forward progress. And here I want to be really careful about not catching any chips under the cutting edges, because this is my final pass, the final tool to cut the chamber. Alright, so I've run our finishing reamer all the way into my stopping point. So now I have to do my first test fitting of the barrel. I'm going to blow this out, get all the chips and coolant out. So, in order to test fit our receiver, we're going to go ahead and thread it on here. Now, I pretty well know that the headspace is not nearly deep enough yet, but we'll go ahead and put that there. Then I'm going to take my Go headspace gauge, put that into my chamber, and then I have my bolt body. Now I've taken off the extractor, and I have taken out the firing pin mechanism, because what I want to be measuring is the distance. I'm measuring the lockup of the bolt face against the gauge when the bolt lugs are fully engaged. So I don't want a firing pin getting in the way, I don't want the extractor getting in the way, anything like that. Okay, there we go. Now, because the barrel isn't threaded all the way on, the bolt will lock down nice and easily. What we'd normally do is we'll leave the bolt unlocked, we'll thread the receiver all the way on, and then what we want to do is check to see if the bolt will close. And as you can see, it will not. It'll get to that point and stop. So that tells me that my headspace isn't deep enough yet. I need the bolt to just close on the Go gauge. So in order to measure how far I need to go, I'm going to unscrew this about a turn or two, lock that down, and now I'm going to thread it in again until I feel it stop. and that's right there. Now I can measure with a feeler gauge the gap that I have left between the barrel and the receiver face, and that will tell me how much more headspace I need to cut. The answer is right about 57 thousandths of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and cut 40 with my finishing reamer and then come back and make another measurement. This will probably take me 2 or 3 passes, just pulling the chips out. So now I should have right about 17 thousandths left, and I'm going to test fit the receiver again. And see what it really is. And now you can see that the bolt is moving farther forward, but still not closing, which is good. It shouldn't yet. We'll go ahead and unthread the receiver, close the bolt, and then tighten it down again. That's right about snug. Now once again, I'm going to use a feeler gauge to measure this space right here. And I do want to leave that with about 1 or maybe 2 thousandths, so that when I torque down the barrel, that presses right up nicely against the face of the receiver. So we should be at 17. Let's start with a 17 gauge, and that fits. 18, 19, I may have mismeasured the first time. 20. Alright, a 20 thousandths fits and 21 does not. So we have 20 thousandths here minus the 1 or 2 that we want to leave. So I need to cut another 18. I'm going to do another incremental step. This time I'll take 10. And that will leave me with just a couple left. Now up to this point, I'm using the standard tailstock. We have our dial indicator right here, and this is what I'm using to count how far I'm going, to measure how much headspace I'm cutting. I'm going to do that again for this next 10 thou cut, and then after that we'll transfer over to a more precise measurement, and I'll show you that in a moment. Alright, you can see here we've got a little more travel, but we're still not quite there. Again, as expected. So let's unthread this a bit, close the bolt down, and run it home. That's snug. Now, start with 11. 11 just barely fits, and 12 does not. So I have 11 thousandths. Now I should say there is one other consideration we need to take into account, and that is that when I torque the barrel down for a final assembly on the receiver, I am going to move it 1 to 2 thousandths in, which is going to tighten up the headspace. So if I have the headspace just perfectly on the edge of acceptable, as tight as possible, when I've got it hand fitted like this, it will in fact be too tight once it's finally torqued in place. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the full 11 thousandths, and that should set me up properly for my final assembly. Alright, I mentioned I was going to use a slightly different type of measurement for my very final cut, which is where we are right now. So what we have here is a plunger dial indicator. I have a metal plate that's torqued down onto my tailstock, and then I have this plunger running up against it. So it's got a magnetic base and it's not moving off this. And what this does is as I run the tailstock and reamer in, this gives me a very accurate reading of exactly how far I'm going. So that's not necessarily important when I've still got 10 or 15 or 20 thou left to cut. But now that I'm on the very last pass, I'm going to go ahead and use this. bolt is the receiver is hand tightened. Our headspace gauge. Now this time, I can predict that this will close with absolutely no resistance, which it does. In fact, if I lift the bolt handle up and drop it, it just closes. Now, as an experiment, I'm going to go ahead and take a piece of paper, which is about 2/1000 thick, 3/1000 on my piece of paper. We'll wet it just a hair, stick it to the bolt face. That will increase now. I have resistance, which is perfect. I can no longer drop the bolt and have it close. I have to push it home. Which tells me that with this hand fitted and my little piece of paper, my headspace is just perfect, which means when I torque this down and get rid of the paper, it will again be just about perfect. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and use the lathe in its low gear setting as a resistance so I can torque this down. And again, I want to line up the little star on my receiver here with that line that I have marked so that the top of the receiver is lined up with the muzzle brake that's been cut in the barrel. Turning my barrel just slightly in the chuck, so we'll tighten it up. That is just about perfect. So let's try our headspace again. Brilliant. Now that this is torqued in place, I have just a little bit of pressure when I close my bolt on the headspace gauge. So that's it for the chambering. We can go ahead and take this out of the chuck now. Alright, and here we go. There's our finished product at this point. We have our nice stainless 308 AR barrel mounted on our M48A receiver. So we still obviously have to put together a stock or a chassis for this and a good trigger for it, but we'll cover that in a separate set of videos. So if you have an old shot out Mauser or other rifle that you've been wanting to rebarrel, hopefully now you have a good idea how to do it. Thanks for watching.